The aim of this video is to import some data from an ActiveX Data Objects record set into an Excel worksheet, and then detect which data type each column in the record set has, so that we can apply an appropriate format to each Excel column. I've got a couple of files set up already to get started, and I'll drop a link in the video description so that you can download these too. This blank workbook that I'm looking at the moment contains some code to import some data from a file called Movies, which is sitting in the same folder as the one that the code is contained in. Just to show you what happens at the moment, the basic setup, if I head to the Macros button in the Developer tab in Excel and run the only available subroutine in there, that will import all the data from that Movies workbook, do a bit of very basic formatting for the column headers which we haven't retrieved yet. There is a date column in that dataset already. The date format there is applied by Excel automatically. What I'd like to be able to do is detect any date column and then apply a custom date format to those. Just to have a quick look at the code I've already written, it's fairly standard stuff. If you've watched any of the previous ADODB videos, you'll recognise a lot of this. I've already set a reference to the ActiveX Data Objects library, so if I head to Tools References, I've set a reference to the ActiveX Data Objects 6.1 library. And then I've connected to that Movies workbook, got all the data from Sheet 1 with that basic select statement, and then written it all out into Sheet 1 starting at cell A2. I've added a bit of extra code that will do the formatting, and that's going to be useful once we've actually retrieved the field names. So what we'd like to do next is write some code to loop through the record set fields collection and then find out the name and the data type of each field. We have a couple of options for how we can loop through the fields collection. For this example, I'm just going to use a simple integer variable and count through the collection using a for loop. So I'll start at the top of the subroutine by saying dim I as integer, and then where I've placed my comment which says loop through the record set fields, we can say for I equals 0. Of course, the fields collection is indexed from 0, as you'll hopefully remember from previous videos, to rs.fields.count -1. I can then provide a couple of blank lines and say next I. And then because I'm going to reference each individual field multiple times inside this loop, I'm going to use a with statement so I don't have to continually return a reference to the individual field. So I'll say with rs.fields and then open some round brackets and pass in the value of the integer variable. I'll provide another couple of blank lines and say end with. And then I would like to simply print out some basic information about that field. So I'm going to say debug.print, and then I'm going to print out its name property, followed by a comma, and then its type property to return its data type as well. Just before I run this, I'll make sure that I can see the immediate window, so I can head to the View menu and choose Immediate Window. And then when I click into and run the subroutine, we'll see a list of field names from that Movies worksheet, and also the number indicating its data type. So the type property returns its value as a number, and just by looking at the list of column names and the numbers next to them, you can start to make some basic predictions about what data type each number represents. So the number 5 appears next to the film ID, the runtime and the budget column, and if you have a quick look back in the Excel worksheet, you can see that all those columns contain numbers. So the number 5 probably has something to do with some kind of numeric value. Not too big a leap of the imagination there. Likewise, 202 appears next to any text column, and the number 7 appears next to the release date column, which of course contains a date. If you want a bit more detail about what these numbers actually mean, then you can head over to the Microsoft Docs website and find the Data Type enum help page. So this lists out every ADODB data type, the name, the number, and the description of what each one is. So we scroll down this list, we can find the number 7 there, represents AD date, and that indicates a date value, unsurprisingly. Then if we scroll down a bit further, we can find AD double, which is the number 5. So all numbers in Excel are stored as double precision floating point numbers. And then if we scroll down even further, we can find the number 202 somewhere towards the bottom of the list with this wonderful name, AD var W char. So it's a variable length, wide character data type. So it's a Unicode encoded character string, basically, with a variable length. Those are pretty much the only 3 data types you're likely to encounter in Excel. Every date or time is stored as a date data type. Every piece of text in a cell is stored as ADVAR wchar, and then the numbers are always stored as doubles in Excel. Even if you're only typing in whole numbers, the values are still stored as double precision floating point numbers. Now that we know that, we can test what data type a column is so that we can do the appropriate thing to each individual column. So let's add a bit more code to our for next loop. I'm just going to close down the immediate window for the time being to give myself a bit more space. And then inside the with statement, after I've printed the name and the type of each column, I want to write out the field name into the top row of sheet 1. So I'm going to say sheet1.range, A1.offset, and then the row offset I want to be 0, and the column offset I want to be equal to the value of the I variable. And then I'm going to make the value of that cell, oops, if I close my parentheses rather than open them, and then I'm going to make the value of that cell to be equal to the name property of the field that we're referencing in this with statement. So just to have a quick check of what that does, if I run the subroutine at this point, I'll find now that I get my column names in the top row of the worksheet. The next thing I'd like to do is apply an appropriate date format to each date field. So to do that, I need an if statement inside my with statement. So I'm going to say if.type equals, and then because this is based on an enumeration and I have a reference to the ActiveX Data Objects library, I get to pick from a simple list. I can pick ADDate. Of course, if you wanted to use the underlying value, you could also check if the type was equal to the number 7, but I find my code is a lot more readable if I use the enumerations. So I'm going to say ADDate, then, and I'll provide a couple of blank lines before saying end if. Next, I'd like to apply a custom date format to all the populated cells in that column. Just before I do that, I'm going to switch back into Excel, and I'm on the Home tab of the ribbon here, just so that I can see the Format drop-down list at the top of the screen. Excel automatically applies formats to date columns when they're copied from a record set, so hopefully you can see if I select either a number or a text column, the format remains as general. But if I select a date column, it shows me that Excel has automatically applied the standard date format. I'd like to modify that date format for every populated cell in column C from cell C2 downwards. Now, if I could guarantee that every single cell in column C, or every row, every film had a populated date, I could use the end XL down property to find the bottom of the list. So from cell C2, I could say end XL down, and that would find the last populated cell in that column. But I can't always guarantee that when I retrieve data from another worksheet using ActiveX Data Objects, that every row will be populated. So for example, if I scroll across to column K, where the film budget is contained, if I try to end XL down from there, then I'd find if I press the Control key and the down arrow key, it stops just above the first blank cell. So to avoid potential problems with missing dates in my date column, I'm not going to rely on the end property. I'm going to rely on finding how many rows the record set has returned, and then format the appropriate number of rows on the worksheet as well. We can find out how many rows the record set has returned by interrogating its record count property. Now you may remember from an earlier video that in order to return the record count property successfully, we also need to change the cursor type of the record set. So just before we open up the record set, I'm going to say rs.cursorType equals ADOpenStatic. Then to capture the record count, I'm going to declare a new variable towards the top of the subroutine. So I'll say something like dim row count as long. And then after having opened the record set, we can add a line which says row count equals rs.recordCount. Then inside the if statement, I'm just going to quickly copy and paste a bit of code from the previous line actually, the bit that says sheet1.range A1.offset 0, I. So that bit of code there returns a reference to the cell, the appropriate number of columns to the right from cell A1. I'd also like to move one row down from there, so I'm going to change my row offset to 1. So at this point, if we were importing the same block of data we have been so far, we'd be offsetting from cell A1, one row down, and then the appropriate number of columns to the right, and returning a reference to, in this case, cell C2. Now I'd like to resize that selection to be equal to the number of rows returned by the record set. So to make that work, I can just extend this line now by saying .resize, open some parentheses, and then for the row size, I can pass in the value of the row count variable. I don't need to change the column size, I'm already referring to just one single column, but I could modify the column size there as well, but I don't need to do that, I can just omit that parameter. So just say resize row count. Then I'd like to apply a different number format to that cell, so I can say .number format equals, and then I can just construct a custom date format as a string. So in some double quotes there, I can make this quite long and elaborate. I can type in 4 lowercase d's to get the full name of the day of the week, followed by a space, and then a single d will give me the number of the day of the month, and then another space and 4 m's will give me the full month name, and then another space and 4 y's will give me the year as a 4-digit year. You can mix and match these combinations of D's and M's and Y's to come up with a format that you like. If you want to stick a comma after the name of the day, you can stick a comma there as well. So feel free to play around with this or have a quick look at the help page for the number format property to get some more advice. But all I'm going to do at this point is run my subroutine, and when I see the end results now, I've got a much more elaborate date format. You can hopefully see that it's applied a custom format rather than the original date format that Excel tends to pick. One of the nice things about the technique we've used here is that it doesn't matter which order we pick our columns from the original data source. It's only columns which actually contain dates once they've been pasted into the Excel worksheet that will receive the custom date format. So currently that's column C which has the custom format. Let's change our query so that it selects only the title and the release date columns, so that column B will be the one which contains the dates. If we switch back to the Visual Basic Editor, we do have a line of code which clears the contents and formats and everything basically except for the column widths from sheet 1. So if we head back down to the code which selects from sheet 1 in the Movies workbook, we can change the asterisk, which represents all the columns, to just the title and the release date columns. And I'm going to write these in some square brackets, so release date as well. So if I run the subroutine again, we'll clear the contents and formats from the worksheet, and then it will place the new data starting in cell A2. So column B now is the one which contains the custom date format, and the formatting of column C is reverted to the general format. We can also check that we're applying the format to the correct number of rows. If we head down to the bottom of column B by holding down the Control key and tapping the down arrow key, we'll find that the last populated cell in column B has the custom date format assigned, but if we move down one further cell from there, it reverts to the general format. And we can change the number of rows we're returning as well by modifying the select statement. Let's head back to the VB editor. I'm going to include an extra couple of columns after the title column. So I'm going to include the nominations field for the Oscar nominations, and also the Oscar wins field. So nominations, Oscar wins, and make sure there's a comma separating each column from the next. I'm then going to add a where clause to return only the Oscar nominated films. So after the from clause from sheet 1, I'm going to add the where keyword and then refer to nominations and then check that that's greater than 0. Okay, so having done that, we can run the subroutine again. We can switch back to Excel. I'll need to head up to the top of the worksheet this time, so I'm going to hold the Control key and tap the up arrow key. So you can see we've ended up at row number 542. So we can see that in column D now, if I select the non-populated cell, that's got a general format, but heading back up one row, that's clearly got the custom format applied to it. And again, we've reverted the date formats or the formatting from column B by clearing the worksheet. That's returned to the general format, and column D is the one which contains the custom format now. Next, I'd like to change the Oscar nominations and Oscar wins columns for the budget and box office columns, and then apply a custom number format to those. Let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and in my select list, rather than using nominations, I'm going to use the budget column, and rather than Oscar wins, I'll use the box office instead. So having done that, I can run the subroutine, and then I'll get those two values entered into columns B and C. I'd like to format them as some form of currency. Now these are quoted in US dollars, so I want the US dollar symbol at the beginning, and then I want my numbers separated with commas to separate the units of thousands. So to make that work, there are a couple of different ways we could do this, but I'm going to go back to the Visual Basic Editor first, and I'm going to add an else if clause to my if statement. So I'm going to say else if dot type equals ADODB, which is the data type of all numbers from an Excel data source. Then I can copy and paste my previous line of code. There's no need to write that all out again. And we can change our number format code. Now, if I type in a dollar symbol and just use a fairly standard $#, $#0 number format to get my numbers formatted with commas separating the units of thousands and what I expect to be a dollar symbol, when I run this subroutine, that's not quite what I get. Because I've got UK regional settings, the $sign gets translated into a £sterling symbol, so not quite the end result I wanted. If you want to know how to generate the custom number formats to get your numbers in a particular way, one nice way to do this is to select a cell containing the number you want to format and then launch the Format Cells dialog box. A couple of different ways of doing that. I'm going to click the Number Format dialog box launcher button just there. So I've inadvertently applied an existing number format called currency by typing in that code, $symbol $##0. If I want to change this so that the symbol isn't a £sterling symbol, but is a US dollar symbol instead, what I can do is scroll down through the list to find $English United States. And then, if I have a look at the custom category in this dialog box, it will show me the code required to generate that number format. So what I can do now is copy this from the type box here, cancel that Format Cells dialog box, head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then paste in what I've just copied. When I run the subroutine again, the number format now will show US dollars instead of £sterling. Now I'd like to include the Oscar nominations and Oscar wins columns in my dataset again. So I'm going to go back to the Visual Basic Editor, and at the end of my select list after the release date, I'm going to type in some square brackets, nominations, and then another comma, and in some more square brackets, Oscar wins. Now you will probably spot the obvious problem with this before I even attempt to run it. If I do run the subroutine and check back in the workbook, we'll see that I've formatted my Oscar nominations and Oscar wins because their data type is also ADW. They receive the same currency format. So I need some way to isolate the budget and box office columns. There's no way to do that using just the data type alone. Every number from an Excel worksheet will have the ADW data type. So one possible option is to do something with the field names in the data source to allow us to detect columns which should be currency columns. So to make that work, I'm going to head back to the original movies workbook and just double click to open that up. And then a simple way to do this, I think, if we find the column names in the workbook, so column K and L, I'm just going to edit those cells to include a space and a $ symbol at the end. So having done that, that uniquely identifies the fields which should contain currency information because they have a $ symbol in their name. So if I save that workbook now and then close it down, I'll need to make a couple of small changes. First of all, back in the Visual Basic Editor, because I've changed the column names in the underlying data source, I need to make sure my select list references the correct column names as well. So I'm going to modify my select list to say budget space dollars and box office space dollars. And then just to reassure myself that if I run that, I get the correct results. There we go. Now I can check for the column name containing a $ symbol. So back in my Visual Basic Editor, in the else if clause, as well as checking that the type is double, I also want to check that the name contains the $ symbol. So I can do this in a variety of ways. I'm going to do this using the instring or instr function. So instring, open some round brackets. Then I can check if the .name property contains a $ symbol. And as long as that returns a value that's greater than 0, it means that the name does indeed contain a $ symbol somewhere in its title. So if I run the subroutine again, we'll see now that only the fields whose name contains a dollar symbol get the currency format. Next, I'd like to change my code so that rather than writing the data into sheet 1 every time, it creates a new worksheet for the output of our record set. So I'm going to go back to the Visual Basic Editor, and at the top of the subroutine I'm going to declare a new variable, dim ws as worksheet. I'm going to keep the line in which clears everything from sheet 1, but I'm just going to comment it out for the time being. Then, after I've opened up the record set and retrieved the row count, before I write the information into a new worksheet, I'm going to say set ws equals this workbook.worksheets.add. So when you add a worksheet, that automatically makes that worksheet the active sheet. I'm going to then change any reference to sheet 1 from this point down, so I'm going to copy from the record set into range A2 on the new worksheet. And then rather than typing in the names into sheet 1, I'm going to type the names into the worksheet WS. Likewise, the formatting will be changed for dates and currency values on the worksheet, the new worksheet WS. And then finally, just inside this with block at the bottom that does all the tidying up, I'm going to change that sheet 1 there to say WS as well. Now the reason I've done this is to highlight a bug with ActiveX data objects when you copy from a record set, and it's all to do with formatting in Excel worksheets. It's something I've mentioned in previous videos, for example this one here where we're getting data from a SQL Server database using ActiveX data objects. The same little annoying bug/feature occurs there as well. So to demonstrate what I mean by that, I'm going to head back to Excel first, and rather than just clear the contents and the formats of these cells, I'm actually going to delete all the cells on the entire worksheet by right-clicking in the top left-hand corner and choosing Delete. So that's a completely empty worksheet. If we select any cell on that sheet, the format of all those cells will say General. Okay. Going back to the Visual Basic Editor, I'm now going to run this code to create my new worksheet and send my new copied data into that worksheet. And if I have a look back at Excel, everything looks pretty normal on the new sheet we've just created. But if I go back to sheet 1 at this point, if I click into at least row 2, so anywhere below where the column headings would be, and click through these columns, you might notice when I get to column D, that suddenly obtains a date format. It doesn't affect numbers or text, but it does affect the dates that we import from an Excel worksheet. If I delete that column or the entire worksheet again, just to make sure that column D is now set back to general, I'll just type in a quick number in there so we can see this clearly happens again. If I switch back to Excel and then run the subroutine again, we'll see that we get back to our new worksheet with all the formats in place. If I head back to sheet 1, we can see that column D has indeed been formatted as a date again. It's potentially even worse than that. I'm going to get rid of column D again. The reason we end up with all these nice formats on the final output sheet is because we've explicitly applied them. So for instance, for the date there, if I head back to sheet 1 first and then head back to the Visual Basic Editor, I'm just going to comment out all of the code which applies the formatting to those columns. So the entire if statement I'm going to select and then comment out. So what we're doing with this loop now is writing out the column names. So if I run the subroutine again, if I check back on my new worksheet, you can hopefully see that the date format, the date data type, hasn't been detected in the output sheet at all. The release dates are shown with a general format, but if I go back to sheet 1 again, we see that column D is the one that's received the date format. So this is all a little bit odd. It's definitely a bug, and it's been in place in ActiveX data objects for quite some time. This video is all the way back from 2019, and it's been spotted by several other people. You can find lots of other blogs and articles on the web that describe the same feature. So of course this is potentially incredibly annoying for a couple of different reasons. One, if you're not applying your own custom date format to your date columns, you'll find they won't receive a date format at all. Secondly, even more annoying, if you already had data in sheet 1, that might inadvertently be changed to a date format when you didn't want it to. So what can we do about this? Well, first of all, let's go back and just bring back the line of code which clears everything from sheet 1. So just to prove that, we just execute that subroutine using the F8 key to step through the first couple of lines. That's sufficient if I just stop the subroutine to clear the date formats from column D again, so it's back to a general format. Then if I just get rid of the extra worksheets I've included here as well, I'm going to select and then right click and delete them. Starting on sheet 1, I'm just going to step through the procedure from the point at which we insert the new worksheet. So I'm going to set a breakpoint on that line, and I'll hit the F5 key to run the subroutine as quickly as possible up to that point. So at this stage we don't have any data copied, and the data type on column D in sheet 1 is still the general data type. So if I switch back to the Visual Basic Editor and then just use the F8 key to step through the next part, I'll insert the new worksheet first. So that's sheet 5. If I check back in Excel, I'm on sheet 5, that's the active sheet. And then if I carry on stepping through using the F8 key again, that will insert all the data from the record set. So at this point, if I have a quick check back on the worksheet, column D has indeed received the date format on the new sheet, and if I switch back to sheet 1, it still retains the general format. So it seems that speed is a factor here. If I slow the procedure down by stepping through it, the date formats get applied correctly to the correct sheet. So let's just head back to sheet 1 and then the Visual Basic Editor and stop running that subroutine. And then I'm going to remove my breakpoint. So I guess if we could insert a bit of code that delays the action of inserting the worksheet and then copying from the record set, that should be sufficient to make the date format be applied correctly to the correct sheet. So one very simple way that I've found works reasonably reliably is after inserting the worksheet, explicitly select it by saying ws.select. Now, it's not 100% reliable, I have to admit, but we'll build on this in a moment. Now, this shouldn't matter. You shouldn't have to select a worksheet. And in fact, you don't have to select a worksheet when you first insert it. When you add it, the add method makes that worksheet the active sheet anyway. But if I run the subroutine again now with no breakpoints, if I check back in Excel, we should see that on the new worksheet, sheet 6, the date format has been detected. And then if I look back at sheet 1, we'll see that column D still has the general format applied. So a quick and simple select option is, in many cases, most cases, sufficient to get the date format applied correctly. We could also consider moving more of the code from later on in the subroutine to in between, adding the worksheet and copying from the record set. So if we scroll down towards the bottom, we have a little section here which is to do with formatting the column headers. Now I know we haven't actually written the column headers in yet at the point we've just added the worksheet, but we can still work out which cells we want to format. So I'm just going to grab this with block here. I'm going to cut it from the with block at the bottom of the subroutine and then head back up just after we've selected the worksheet and then paste that in. I'll just tidy up the indenting there as well. So here I want to refer to with ws.range and then A1. And then I want to resize that to have one row, and then I want to refer to not the current region columns.count. There is no current region yet because we haven't put anything in the worksheet. So what I want to do is refer to the record set fields count. So I'm going to replace current region.columns with rs.fields.count. So that will apply the formatting to the empty column headers before we even start to copy from the record set. So if we give that one a quick test, we can see the end results of this one, and we've got everything looking normal on the final output sheet, but sheet 1 still has the general format for column D where the dates would have appeared. If that still doesn't introduce a sufficient delay, I suppose at this point you could start considering doing an explicit wait using application.wait, or maybe using the timer property in a do until loop. But I always feel those sorts of solutions feel a little bit hacky, and how long do you have to wait for? How do you know how long is a sufficient wait time? So I'm kind of loath to include those sorts of solutions. As I say, it's a problem that's affected the CopyFromRecordset method for quite some time. I'm not the only person to have noticed this. As I say, this post is from all the way back in 2011, describing exactly the same behaviour with CopyFromRecordset. I'd be interested to hear about whether you guys have got other interesting solutions to this particular problem, whether you've encountered it yourself before, whether you can even replicate that behaviour. I'm not entirely certain it affects everybody in exactly the same way. So if you have anything to add on this subject, I'd be delighted to hear about it in the comments below. But apart from that, I think that's a reasonably good summary of how you detect data types for your ADODB record sets, and allows you to apply nice specific column formats to your data once it's been output into an Excel worksheet. So I hope you found that one useful. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.